Welcome to Cyber Threat Intel, your go-to source for the latest updates, news, and insights on cyber threats. Our goal is to arm you with the knowledge to protect yourself in the digital age, whether you're a cybersecurity professional or just curious about the threats lurking in the digital shadows. Make sure to subscribe now on YouTube or your favorite podcast listening platform to join us on the front lines of cybersecurity, because in the world of cyber threats, knowledge is power. Welcome. This is Cyber Threat Intel. I'm your host, John Good. This is episode number 62. And it is Monday, July 8th, 2024. If you're joining the show for the first time, glad to see you here. If you're coming back from another episode or some other content, glad to see you returning to get your fix of cyber threat intel. If you want to see all the articles that we cover in the episodes or some other important articles that we add to the feed, then head on over to cyberthreatintel.com. Again, cyberthreatintel.com. You can find all that information there. Also, if you're joining from last week in the United States, we had a holiday, July 4th, so we didn't have an episode at the end of the week because of the holiday, but we're back and we're ready to get back into the content here. So also, again, just if you need a snack or a drink to get you through the content, make sure you run and go do that before we get into the content. But with that being said, let's go ahead and flip on over my screen and hop into the articles. All right, so first article, Australian man charged for fake Wi-Fi scam on domestic flights. An Australian man has been charged with running a fake Wi-Fi access point during a domestic flight with an aim to steal user credentials and data. The unnamed 42-year-old allegedly established fake free Wi-Fi access points, which mimicked legitimate networks, to capture personal data from unsuspecting victims who mistakenly connected to them. The Australian Federal Police, the AFP, said in a press release last week. The agency said the suspect was charged in May 2024 after it launched an investigation a month earlier following a report from an airline about a suspicious Wi-Fi network identified by its employees during a domestic flight. So right away when we think about this, or when I think about this at least, I'm thinking of the whole incident response process. When you think of people within your organization and how all of this stuff works, this security stuff works, is you have your employees throughout the organization. Those are your first line of defense. So we want to make sure that they are trained for things that they should spot or how to react if things happen that are, they kind of have this feeling where it just doesn't feel right. Maybe they don't know why it's not right, but it just doesn't feel right, or it's not the standard way of how things are operating, because we want them to report these things so that we can actually identify what's going on. We can look into it further, do some additional research, see if it is legitimate, see if it is indeed malicious or something that we need to look even further at. But you have to train your employees or have them understand those kinds of things. A lot of this training that we give employees is geared towards specific roles, and that's how it should be. A lot of times we'll have generic security awareness training or things that people have to do because they are just kind of general awareness things that everybody has to be aware of. But then you want to get into more specific training for individual roles because, for instance, your cybersecurity team is going to obviously need to understand very specific things as far as cybersecurity. And then when we start talking about, sales staff, they're not going to have the same technical requirements that a cybersecurity team member is going to have, or an accountant, or some financial person, or some other non-technical role. They just have a different need for the types of training that they need. Now, you could have a lot of your user base in a similar kind of training course or security awareness training or something like that. How you divide it up is up to you, but you need to understand that that is a crucial part of identifying these things that can happen. And in this situation, just right away, that's the immediate thing that I thought of because it just makes sense. You want your employees to identify that when a customer complains or something that, hey, I'm having to put in some credentials that doesn't seem right. Well, then, yeah, you should look into that further and be able to report that and know how to go about that as an employee. So a very interesting situation for sure. says users who attempted to connect to the free phony network were prompted to enter their email address or social media credentials through a captive portal webpage. So a lot of times these captive portals, they exist, especially at businesses when they're giving guests or customers access. Even on the airlines, that's pretty typical. You have some kind of captive portal where you go to it, you have to watch an ad or something in order to get access. Even if you go to like a Starbucks or a coffee shop or something like that, you're going to absolutely have to log in to one of these portals. So that in itself is not that weird, but having to enter in things like additional credentials, email addresses, social media credentials, login, usernames, passwords, those kinds of things, that is certainly not the norm with these different portals. So, but that is quite interesting. Quote here says, email and password details harvested could be used to access more personal information, including a victim's online communications, stored images and videos, or bank details, the AFP said. So certainly this person could get that information and then later on go log into your account, look at all the information or the things that you've been doing with that account and use it for additional malicious purposes, or even just, just going through your personal information. So again, very, very interesting. If convicted, faces up to a maximum of 23 years in prison. 23 years. These penalties are getting pretty substantial for people to still want to be malicious threat actors, which is interesting. Quote here says, to connect to a free Wi-Fi network, you shouldn't have to enter any personal details. Very clear, right? This is not typical to do, such as logging in through your email or a social media account, AFP Western Command Cybercrime Detective Inspector Andrea Coleman said. Again, pretty standard with free Wi-Fi or captive portals in a lot of cases. You're not going to typically have to enter in your email credentials or social media credentials or anything like that. Maybe if you have like a rewards program, a lot of companies, hotels, things like that are having you, maybe log in with that account, or even at hotels, a lot of cases, it's just putting your last name and then the room number, and then you just get access because they'll bill the room if they have to for like enhanced Wi-Fi or something. But otherwise, it's just free Wi-Fi and you just put that information and you're good to go. So should be suspicious based on the type of information that a captive portal is requesting. If it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't seem right, it's probably not right. But again, we're training our employees. We're making sure that they're aware of how to report things and how to identify what doesn't seem right based on normal operations. Next article, Cloudflare blames recent outage on BGP hijacking incident. Internet giant Cloudflare reports that its DNS resolver service 1.1.1.1, which is the IP address, was recently unreachable or degraded for some of its customers because of a combination of Border Gateway Protocol BGP hijacking and a route leak. The incident occurred last week and affected 300 networks in 70 countries. Despite these numbers, the company says the impact was quite low, and in some countries, users did not even notice. And they go ahead and they give an image here kind of what happened. But the incorrect announcement was accepted by multiple networks, including a tier 1 provider, which treated it as a remote triggered black hole RTBH route. The hijack occurred because BGP routing favors the most specific route. So we're not going to dive deep into how BGP works or any of these routing protocols, but essentially some of these, including BGP, they rely on the how specific you are with the route, right? So if you, for instance, and it gives a couple examples here on the screen, if you have a /24 route that you provide, so if you said 1.1.1. anything, so any IP address with those first 3 octets, then that would be one thing. If you gave a specific IP address, so 1.1.1.1/32, which would mean an IPv4 address, where that is the specific one IP address, there's no deviation from that. That is a more specific route. And then so that would be trusted. And again, that's how some of these routing protocols work. But the ability to do that, or if you can configure that and maliciously or even unintentionally or not maliciously, it's just going to trust that route more because it's more specific. You're saying there's no leeway, or there's no extra IP addresses that could fit in here. We are only going to trust this one specific IP address. And that's kind of why this is linked to this issue as far as why this happened, right? They were able to provide a more specific IP address, and that kind of screwed things up. And again, they give some more diagrams in here that you should definitely look at. Cloudflare's first line of response was to engage with the networks involved in the incident while also disabling peering sessions with all problematic networks to mitigate the impact and further propagation of incorrect routes. So again, with these routing protocols, what happens is you have these kind of neighboring routers or neighboring units, and when the network starts pushing out these routes and these updates, then it starts to propagate out and go out to all these other nodes, and just continues to go out to all these locations until it's everywhere. And that's kind of the idea with routing protocols, and in general, in a basic sense, how they work. So when that happens, it's kind of a domino effect, right? It starts to spread. And so you have to kind of, it's kind of the whole containment aspect, where you have to make sure that you contain it to a certain level so it doesn't just keep pushing out and infecting everything else. So it can be quite problematic with routing protocols in general if you get your routes poisoned, because that, again, it spreads out, it propagates out to these different units, and then then they all have the incorrect information. Company explains that the incorrect announcements didn't affect internal network routing due to adopting the Resource Public Key Infrastructure, RPKI, which led to automatically rejecting the invalid routes because there are certain types of validations that are included in that. Then they go ahead and they give long-term solutions at Cloudflare in their post-mortem write-up. So just speaking in general, and if you want to see these updates or these long-term solutions, go ahead and look at the article because they're listed on there. But this is the idea of when something happens, how do you learn from that? How do you write it up? What are the things that you put in that report? There's always a lessons learned process in any incident, and really anytime something goes wrong, you should definitely be documenting things. But I would say when things go right too, because a lot of times what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify problems or areas where you can improve. This whole thing is about continuously improving. From a security aspect, when we have security incidents, we have to learn how to improve our networks and improve our security program so that we don't have the same kind of issues. And hopefully those fixes also correct things that maybe we don't see, because that can certainly happen too. Just because you think of a solution or something to learn from doesn't mean that's the only thing that it actually affects. That just means that was the visible thing that you saw it affect and what made you think about it. But certainly it could affect other things, and hopefully positively. Unfortunately, it could also negatively affect things, and then you'll just learn that in a future lesson. But the idea is that you're continuously improving your program. You're continuously learning from the situations that you're in. And again, I mean, anytime a routing protocol, especially like BGP, is impacted from a major provider like Cloudflare or Google or Amazon or anything like that, it's going to be a big news because it's going to affect a lot of people. Because especially with like the internet and something like this, it's like you as a company can't necessarily dictate what happens in that situation. You certainly could change your DNS resolver or something of that nature, but it's a big deal. And when we're talking about traffic and routing and everything like that too, one of the things that you also should be aware of is where your data is going through. So sometimes we'll talk about doing something like a trace route on data. So if you have another branch location or something and you know the path the data should take, if you're able to use the trace route command, you can actually track that and kind of see where the data goes, because we have seen routes be poisoned where they end up sending data through other government networks or things of that nature that are quite suspicious if you're not suspecting it. So, for instance, if you're in the United States and you didn't expect your data to you were trying to reach a data center, let's say in another state in the United States, you wouldn't expect your data to go through, I don't know, like North Korea's network or the Chinese government's network or something like that, right? And that's just an example of the hypothetical kind of situation that could happen. But you just wouldn't expect that because it wouldn't make sense for that to happen unless it was configured that way and that was normal operation. So a lot of things going on with this article. Don't want to dive too much more into that, but again, always an interesting situation. Next article, Ticketmaster discredits dark web claims of stolen barcodes for Taylor Swift concerts. Ticketmaster shot down claims made on the dark web that hackers have access to working ticket barcodes for several upcoming Taylor Swift concerts and other events. On Friday, a hacker allegedly offered for sale event barcodes for Taylor Swift's Eras Tour concert dates in New Orleans, Miami, and Indianapolis. Barcodes are typically scanned at the entrance for events. In total, the hacker offered about 170,000 barcodes for sale, with about 20,000 for sale at each show. So if you haven't been to a concert or really a lot of events in general lately, a lot of them are going to these barcode systems so that you can just have a barcode on your phone and have them scan it. And that's kind of like, that is your ticket. That is your pass. And instead of having a paper copy, you just have this digital copy, and it's a little bit easier to deal with and manage inventory and all those kinds of things. Taylor Swift, obviously, that's going to be a big deal because the concerts are massive, but certainly interesting. And Ticketmaster and Taylor Swift have had issues in the past before too, as far as like bots buying the passes and all these kinds of things. The hacker also threatened Ticketmaster with more leaks if they're not paid $2 million, claiming to have 30 million more barcodes for NFL games, Sting concerts, and more. Again, hackers would love to go after Live Nation, Ticketmaster, those places, and try to get access to these, especially these lucrative passes. The quote here says, Ticketmaster's Safe Ticks technology protects tickets by automatically refreshing a new and unique barcode every few seconds so it can't be stolen or copied, the spokesperson said. So that is a fraud prevention kind of thing, because obviously you only have so much inventory of tickets, and you know that the arena is going to hold 30,000 people, so you have 30,000 tickets or whatever it is. So you have to have a way of managing that and making sure that's secure, because you don't want people to just be able to regenerate tickets that are valid, especially, or try to compromise the tickets, copy the tickets, manipulate them in any way. Ticketmaster's parent company, Live Nation, confirmed last month that the company's account on data storage platform Snowflake had been breached. And that's certainly something that we've covered on this show. And that's kind of another thing too, is thinking about this when either you get breached or your parent company gets breached or another company that you're associated with gets breached and customer information was in there. And that can kind of lead to further attacks down the line. We don't always think about that because we think about the immediate situation when a company gets breached. Okay, what's the immediate impact of that? We don't always, and it's hard to do, it's difficult to do, right? We can't always think future state on some of these things as far as, the data that was accessed. Certainly, if it's sensitive data, we can estimate or guess use an educated guess as far as like what is likely to happen. But a lot of times these can be just data gathering activities or data gathering breaches where they're just trying to gather data to use in future attacks. And those can be dangerous, again, because we can't always predict those. And attackers are unpredictable. and then they have your customer list, and they can just go after these people directly instead of having to then compromise your site again. You just make a legitimate looking email, send it to one of these customers that was in a data dump, and trick them fairly easily than trying to go after your enterprise security controls and trying to bypass those. So that is something to absolutely think about if you're in the career field or if you're trying to get in the career field, because these are all lessons you'll learn, especially for newer. These are lessons you'll learn, things you'll go through as you get deeper into your career. Next article, hackers stole OpenAI secrets in a 2023 security breach. OpenAI suffered a security breach in 2023, the New York Times reported. The American newspaper revealed that the threat actors gained access to the internal discussions among researchers and other employees, but they did not access the source code of the company's systems. There's a quote here. It says, early last year, a hacker gained access to the internal messaging systems of OpenAI, the maker of ChatGPT, and stole details about the design of the company's AI technologies, reported the New York Times. The hacker lifted details from discussions in an online forum where employees talked about OpenAI's latest technologies, according to two people familiar with the incident, but did not get into the systems where the company houses and builds its artificial intelligence. The executives believed the threat actor was a lone hacker with no link to a foreign government. It also says Chinese companies are investing significant effort in researching AI models and developing highly powerful AI systems. Many experts believe China has already surpassed the United States as the largest provider of AI talent, contributing nearly half of the world's leading AI researchers. So this whole thing is kind of interesting, AI in general. We've talked about AI before on the show. I'm sure you've probably heard of AI in the news. But, understanding who your threat actors are, where does your risk come from, who is likely to target you. When we're talking about something like artificial intelligence, obviously that's a hot technology right now. And, it's not really surprising that there's mention of maybe a foreign government being connected to this kind of breach. Were they actually connected to it? I mean, they say no in this article, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is accurate. We've seen that before where companies have made statements and then it ends up being different than what they said, either because they knew that it was different or because they find out over time throughout the investigation. So, but it is just interesting to see how, how companies are really going after AI and hackers are starting to look at that. Think about this too. A lot of these AI systems, if they store the data that you're putting in as a user, well, then that's like a huge treasure trove of information for them, because you're going to ask questions about all kinds of different stuff. Maybe you have personal data or something that you put in there too in that question to help the engine answer the question. But then now they have access to that. Even just from the AI companies themselves, from that perspective, do you feel comfortable with them storing that information? How do they store that information? Is it protected? What kind of controls are in place? There's all these kinds of questions still with AI, and I definitely don't think that they are going to get answered anytime soon. But certainly it is interesting that something like ChatGPT was breached. So, all right, let's keep moving here. Next article, Alabama State Department of Education suffered a data breach following a blocked attack. Alabama State Department of Education announced it had thwarted a ransomware attack on June 17th. However, threat actors accessed some data and disrupted services before the attack was stopped. And their superintendent Mackey revealed that there is a possibility that threat actors gained access to some student and employee data. It also added that employee bank account and direct deposit information were not compromised because they are not stored on state servers. Quote here says, what I would say is to all parents and all local and state education employees out there, they should monitor their credit. I think that's pretty commonplace now, actually, that you have to do that. They should assume that there's a possibility that some of their data was compromised, Mackey said at a Wednesday press conference. We don't know exactly what data was breached, and we can't disclose everything. But again, the attack on our system was interrupted and stopped by our IT professionals before the hacker could access everything they were after that we know, Mackey added. So, it's getting interesting, especially with schools and educational systems, because think about this. If it's like an elementary school or somebody who is not, let's say, not 18, because that's typically kind of the dividing line, at least in the United States, as far as like what's considered like an adult, in quotes, right? If you're listening to the podcast. But think about that, and we've seen this with people that are deceased too. But this whole idea of getting access to somebody's social security number, like in the United States, very early on, and just being able to take advantage of that as a malicious threat actor for years and years and years. If that person's like 10, let's say it's a kid that's 10 years old, and now you have at least 8 years to just leverage that information, get loans, all those kinds of things. I mean, I don't necessarily know how the back end of a lot of that stuff works. So I don't know if there's additional checks for that, but certainly if you can leverage that, then you could certainly you could cause some harm, especially to that person's credit and their ability to use that and all those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see when hackers go after schools. It's almost kind of like they're just trying to test things out, or maybe it's students themselves, because I mean, there is some sensitive information that these departments of education store and schools store, but it's not like they're going after a Google or something that could pay millions of dollars. So I always find it interesting, like why they would choose that as a target. I mean, my guess is to use that data later for other things, because that would make sense. But we've even seen these attackers try to extort or get ransoms from school districts. And again, it's just like, in my mind, it's like they don't have, $20 million to just give you for the data. It's just not like, it's not in the cards. So very, very interesting to see. So with that being said, that's the last article for today's episode. Again, this is Cyber Threat Intel. I'm your host, John Good. This is episode number 62, and it is Monday, July 8th, 2024. If you want to see all the articles that we covered in the episode, then head on over to cyberthreatintel.com. Again, cyberthreatintel.com. You'll be able to find all that information there. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next one. See you later. Are you tired of overpaying for cybersecurity training? Are you interested in training from industry professionals? Are you looking for cybersecurity career services? If you answered yes to any of those questions, then cybertrainingpro.com is the perfect platform for you. At Cyber Training Pro, we're a one-stop shop for all your cybersecurity needs. We can train you for industry certifications or just improve your overall knowledge and skills in a certain area. Unlike other platforms, we don't stop there. We can also coach you throughout your career, practice your interview skills, or create a high-performing resume with our career services. CybertrainingPro.com isn't just another training platform. Students get exclusive access to our private community, where we go beyond training courses to provide additional content, tips and tricks, and engagement with both other students and staff. Look, by the year 2025, there could be as many as 3.5 million job openings in cybersecurity. With so much opportunity, why not maximize your career potential with a platform that cares about your success? Come join us at cybertrainingpro.com and start building your future today.